Well, there is still time to get out and vote in the provincial election, with many casting ballots today. And when it comes to voting, there are employee rights and employer obligations to be aware of. For more on that, we're joined now by employment lawyer Alex Lucifero. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Afternoon, Megan.
Can we chat first? If people are thinking, okay, it's my time, I'm going to go run out and vote, do they have rights to do that? What's going on there?
Sure. I mean, it's a little known facet of employment law, Megan, but obviously a very topical one given the election today. Employees do have rights under the Ontario Election Act. Their right is to have 3 consecutive hours off of work in order to vote in an election. And so, for example, for employees that perhaps don't work a 9-to-5 job, so in a 9-to-5 situation, employees do have that 3 consecutive hours in the evenings. But for an employee, for example, who works a 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. job, well, that doesn't give them 3 consecutive hours. And again, under the Ontario Elections Act, that employee does have the right to end work early and work at 6 p.m. in that particular example, and have that 3 consecutive hours off of work to vote. Again, that's under the Elections Act in Ontario.
Okay, and let me follow up to that. So they have the right to say, okay, I'm taking my time, I'm going to vote. Is that paid for?
Of course, great question. And using the example we just gave, yes, it is paid time off effectively. So again, where an employer has to allow an employee time off in order to vote, they cannot be punished or penalized for having to do so. And so again, if an employee has to finish an hour early in order to allow them that 3 consecutive hours, they would still be paid that last hour of work. So it is effectively a paid time off, but again, only where an employer has to allow those 3 consecutive hours. An employee cannot be punished or penalized in any particular way for having to take that time off to vote.
Perfect. And so what if an employer maybe isn't aware of these rules, or maybe they are aware and they still say, you know what, no, I need you today, no time off to vote. What then happens?
Yeah, great question, and great distinction, actually, Megan, simply because, and of course, any legislation like this really has no teeth unless there are enforcement mechanisms. And in a case like this, if an employer unknowingly breaches this legislation, they would be subject to fines of up to $5,000. Not a huge amount of money, but still, that would be a fairly significant fine. If, and again, you pointed out the distinction, if an employer knowingly denies an employee time off in a situation where it's required, again, knowingly does so, the fine can be as much as $25,000, so a big increase there. And they can also be subject to up to 2 years less a day of prison, or actually both the fine and imprisonment. And so the enforcement is relatively strict, given how fundamental voting is to any democracy.
Okay, that's really good to know. Now, also, if we can also think of a scenario where maybe that employee were to be terminated over something like that, does it again get more serious in terms of consequences?
Well, certainly, again, an employee cannot be punished or penalized for having to take that time off. And so not only would that employer be subject to those fines that we just discussed, but of course, any employee that is terminated would be owed severance, number one. Severance can be fairly significant, particularly for longer-term employees. And not only severance, Megan, I think in a situation like that where an employer knowingly breaches the Elections Act and then knowingly terminates an employee for that reason, there would be additional punitive and aggravated damages awarded in a case like that as well. It's a lesson for employers out there. You want to take these obligations very, very seriously, and it could end up costing an employer significant amounts of money if they breach those rules.
Okay, good to know, and still time to vote if anyone is at home thinking of doing so. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's Alex Lucifero.
Thanks, Megan.